Can you hear me all right in the back, everybody? Try not to blink while this is going What you just saw there was 120 seconds of an interpretation by 2 high school students. That presentation was put together in less than an hour. They were posed one question and one assignment, and that was portray the entire history of the human organism from beginning to end, and they did that in 120 seconds. So that's where we are today. We're at a point in human history where we've lost touch a little bit with how fast and how far we've gotten to the point of sitting in this room and talking about the marriage of business intelligence and artificial intelligence, because that's the world we're facing right now. Big data, in my opinion, is the logical outcome of where we've come and the kinds of problems that we might face in the future. By a show of hands, I won't ask you a lot of questions, and I won't ask you to raise your hand a lot, but I'd like to ask you, how many of you have noticed that things have gotten extremely complicated and unwieldy in just the last, let's say, 5 or 10 years? Raise your hand. Oh, okay, keep your hand up, please. Please, raise your hand if you feel things have gotten very complicated. Look around the room. You can cancel your therapy appointment for this week, right? It's happening to all of us. We're manufacturing complexity literally in picoseconds, and we're making new discoveries every minute of every day. In fact, according to Eric Schmidt, we're generating as much data every 24 hours as we did from the dawn of humankind to year 2003. So that means at the end of the weekend, we've replicated the entire sum of human knowledge. Does anybody know what this is at all? This is familiar? This is the chart that General McChrystal put up in front of the press a few years back when we were going to do the surge in Afghanistan. And he looked at the cameras and he said, when we understand this chart, we win the campaign in Afghanistan. And for just a moment, the cameras turned on the press and you saw everybody put their pencils down and go, oh no, this is a problem. These charts are charts that IT goes through to order a simple thing like a PC or a new piece of software for a department. I see these regularly, so do you. This happens to be the chart on Obamacare. I had to look, you're laughing, but I had to look a long time to find a chart that could fit on one slide, believe me. In fact, Nancy Pelosi, not long ago, there's videotape of this, and everything I tell you today is verifiable on the internet. Nancy Pelosi held a press conference, and she said, I'm so glad we passed the bill, because now we can read it and find out what's in it. So now look, I'm not picking on Democrats or Republicans because I'm an independent and I think there's room for improvement on both sides. But I will tell you that when you have a public official admit we're passing bills we haven't read and don't know what's in them, and they're producing charts like that, well, we're all in a heap of trouble. And you're going to hear these 4Ds many, many times, particularly from Gary Robinson, who's here from IBM to talk a little bit about big data systems. But the velocity, the volume, the variety, and the veracity of information that is coming at us is unprecedented in all of human history. But here's the problem. From a sociobiological standpoint, you're going to hear a lot about different technologies today, but my job is to give you a context of the environment that you're now facing. And when you think about biological change, evolution takes millions of years. I need new appendages to operate the nav system, drink my coffee, text and drive right now, and they're not coming for millions of years. In fact, we're so disconnected from our biological limitations that we actually have to make laws to remind you can't text and drive at the same time. This is how bad it's gotten. Really? Do we really need a law for that? Because if we don't know what our limits are, the government's going to have to tell us. And I'm sure that there's a lot of you in the room that don't want that. But we don't seem to know we can't drive and text, and we don't seem to know we can't eat donuts all day and sit on the couch either. So this over-regulation, part of this is just coming from simply being disconnected from our biological limitations. What I became interested in many, many years ago was what happens when this complexity races ahead of the cognitive capabilities that we have at this point in human evolution. Well, it turns out that there are 3 steps which occur prior to collapse. And by the way, my definition of collapse is a very simple one. It's a very quick reversion to simpler systems that we understand. When we have a financial or currency collapse, we go to barter. Barter systems we understand. You have a cow, I have some wheat. We meet in the middle of the road and we negotiate until we both feel we got a good deal. But fiat currency? No. Our brains really can't wrap around that. And later, you're probably going to hear about quantum computing. And I just spent some time with, look, I've been bred in Silicon Valley, the home of innovation. But I'm going to tell you that these guys in quantum computing, this isn't just an upgrade. This completely changes everything that we're doing. And you have to be a physicist to understand how a molecule can be a 1 and a 0 at the exact same time. So you're going to hear more about that a little later. So as complexity races ahead of what we biologically are capable of understanding, we become gridlocked. We become unable to fix our problems, and they move, they migrate from generation to generation, they get worse. And every civilization and every organization, even the organizations that you're a part of, reaches a cognitive threshold, a point at which the brain simply is not designed to handle the information overload and the kinds of complex, multi-layered, multi-tiered problems you have to deal with. Effectively, there are 2 clocks. There's the rapid pace of progress, which is changing by the picosecond. We all know that in this room. And the slow pace of evolution. And eventually, just from a logical standpoint, those 2 clocks must eventually meet. And so what happens when they meet? That uneven change between biology and complexity causes a gap to occur. Now, when you think about it, the last, you don't remember evolution since high school probably, but the last time that we had a change in our brains was when we stood upright. We could suddenly see and smell enemies from very, very far away, but we didn't know what to do. We didn't know how to use that to our survival advantage. And so the frontal cortex developed in your brain. That's the CEO of your brain. It occupies about 1/3 of your brain. It's inconveniently positioned right in the front of your head. And we consider this to be a very special event in evolution because this occurred over, let's say, a 3 to 4 million year period of time. And that's really fast on an evolutionary clock. When organizations are young, your problems are simpler. It's easier to attach a cause to an effect. Today, our problems look more like chaotic models in physics, where you have billions of variables, and one variable changes by 0.00000001, and they all change. And so these problems are not easily managed by the left and right brain. All you have to do is give somebody a simple problem on exponentiation, and they always get it wrong. I walk students through this all the time. I give them very simple problems on how problems are exponentiating, and they always go to the left or right side of the brain and come out with the wrong answers. Over time, our problems become larger, they become more complex, and the number of wrong choices begins to exceed the number of right ones. This is the environment that you are making IT decisions in right now. There are more wrong options than right ones. And the number of wrong ones is exponentiated, which means that over time you're becoming an incompetent picker. You try to get all the information you can, but for every study that you find in the internet that says one thing, you'll find 10 that exactly contradict it. So one of the definitions of complexity is more wrong choices than right ones, and the number of wrong ones is growing at a very, very high rate. So what you face today, the environment that humans are trying to survive today, is a high failure rate environment. Today, our tax code, this is already out of date, is 75,000 pages. From 504 pages to 75,000 pages. Anybody who self-files is an idiot. How can you, and it's the very reason, by the way, that General Electric Corporation can pay zero taxes, because they have buildings of tax accountants and computing systems that are, that the government doesn't even have, and they can go into those 75,000 pages and find completely legal and legitimate ways not to pay taxes. Whereas the person on the street that self-files is paying the highest level of taxes, right? Credit card contracts are now 20,000 words. I asked many people, you all have credit cards, is there anyone in the room that's ever read the fine print on their credit card? Raise your hand, because I travel all over the world. I've never had, there's a guy there, you're the first one I've met in 3 years. Really, 20,000 words per credit card. And yet you're obligated to whatever those terms are. If you've ever closed a house, the escrow papers, who reads those? You don't. You're just in there signing as fast as you can. And there's 240 selections at the Cheesecake Factory. Do you have Cheesecake Factory out here? Yeah. My friends get mad at me because we go to restaurants, and wherever we are, I like to count things, and they find it really annoying. It probably is. Complexity has a way of making facts and knowledge very, very difficult to acquire. And when we can't acquire empirical facts, we only have two baskets, right? One is facts, where every time I drop my keys, they fall to the ground, never in suspended animation. And then when the facts drop off, we have a tendency to roll over to empirical beliefs. By the way, I have a radio talk show that's on 5,500 stations across the United States, and I thought I was very brave to go into talk radio, because there are some extremely talented people on talk radio that can speak for 4 hours without mentioning a single fact. It's a tremendous talent, let me tell you. I'm only on the radio 2 hours a week, and I can't do it. I'm not as talented as they are. But most talk radio shows are really, no facts in there. None at all. And it doesn't seem to bother anybody. It's very interesting. So we have this ability to substitute facts with fiction. And again, I'm trying to set a context for what you're going to listen to today. Because you want to make more fact-based decisions, and not decisions on what we call HIPPO, the highest paid person in the room. Right? Not good. We have mythology about raspberry ketones. Dr. Oz gets on and says raspberry ketones will help you drop 20 pounds, and there's a mad rush. About wars, about stem cell research. We now have 1.5 billion readings of the Earth's surface temperature from all around the world, and we still have 65% of Americans that believe that there is no climate change going on. Probably not in this room, but that's the latest statistic. What is a belief? It's very easy. It's unproven. It doesn't mean it's right or wrong, by the way. Maybe one day we'll find out raspberry ketones were the miracle diet drug. We don't know. But let's face it, when we don't have enough data, it's unproven. It doesn't mean it's right, doesn't mean it's wrong. It means we simply don't have the data. It's cognitively inexpensive to have a belief. You either believe it or you don't, but to empirically prove a fact is a very, very taxing event. And using the scientific method even more so, because you must replicate under a variety of conditions. And for chaotic models, for highly complex problems, very difficult to do. And we have large and small beliefs. We have beliefs about climate change, our government, about life on the planet. And then we have small beliefs like crossing the street. I believe when the light is green, it's safe to walk. In fact, in New York, they don't even wait for the light to turn green. That's how you know a native New Yorker. It's about the time the light should turn green. But I don't know. I don't stand on the curb and wait for every car to stop before I cross the walk. The human organism requires both beliefs and knowledge in order to thrive. Going way back to ancient times in the caves, we drew pictures of gods to make women more fertile, to help us catch larger prey, to protect us from threats. In fact, we never let empirical data get in our way. We practiced bloodletting for hundreds of years, despite the fact the patients were dying the more blood we let out. But that didn't stop us. And one thing to remember is, I have a lot of scientist colleagues, and they look at me and they say, no, I make all my decisions based on empirical data. Well, that's not really true, because all science begins with a belief. It begins with a theory, right? Or some proposition. And then we have to go amass as much information as we can to prove the theory. Civilizations and organizations over the history of humankind, they thrive, they do well, they perform at their optimal level when there is an accommodation for both beliefs and also proven knowledge. But when beliefs begin to dominate, knowledge takes a back seat. We become very susceptible to unproven claims. Talk radio, for example, and a lot of the television hosts these days have now become self-appointed experts of one type or another. And we also follow false prophets. Does everybody know who this individual is off to the side here, this Bernie Madoff? Now, it might surprise you that the people who turned over their money to Bernie Madoff were very sophisticated investors. They weren't like us in this room. They've been in the market a long time, folks like Steven Spielberg. And so it makes you wonder, why would people who have been in the market a long time, people who are fact-based, what would cause them to turn over their money? Because the financial markets are so convoluted and so difficult to understand that we, at some point, have to just trust someone. So we turn over our fortunes to false prophets. Decisions and policies over time become shaped by these irrational beliefs rather than knowledge or fact. And so I think you can agree that we're experiencing some of this at the top levels of corporations and also in our governments as well. So I'm going to use an example where I'm going to walk you through, not using a current day example, but I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how these principles play out and why they're dangerous. And I'm going to use the Mayan civilization as an example. For 3,000 years, the Mayans knew they had a tenuous relationship with water. They knew if it didn't rain, the civilization would be destroyed. So many people go down, when they go to look at the Mayan ruins, they go to see the temples. I would urge you to look at something else. They were master hydraulic engineers. They built massive cisterns and reservoirs. They dug underground cisterns so the water wouldn't evaporate. In fact, they used those cisterns for the first refrigeration units so that the food wouldn't spoil. They stored it down there where it was nice and cool and it would last longer as well. And for the first 2,000 or 2,500 years, you see that the Mayans were not only using empirical remedies for their problems, but they were also practicing fetishism. They were making sacrifices of captured slaves to cause the rains to come. But somewhere around 2,000 years, you see them make a shift. No more reservoirs, no more cisterns, no more crop rotation, no more water conservation. What begins to happen is they begin to accelerate fetishism. First, they increase the number of slaves they're murdering. Then they move on to their own people, the old and the infirm, young virgins. At the very last years, prior to the Mayan collapse, you see that they are sacrificing newborn infants, unspoiled infants. Now, many people say to me, well, we haven't made that shift. We're not acting in an irrational way. No, we have people on the planet who believe flying an airplane into a building and murdering innocent civilians is a cure for their problems. To me, throwing newborn infants off the top of pyramids, flying planes into buildings, that's splitting hairs. We're still making that turn. So the first sign that complexity is outpacing our cognitive capabilities is that we become gridlocked. We have solutions, we know what to do, we become unable to act. How many people go through that in their companies? You sit in a meeting, you know what the problem is, you know what the technologies are, you know what the solutions are, you know they're available, but you're not acting on them. And meeting after meeting after meeting, you're not acting on them. The second is that there's a mass confusion between empirical beliefs and empirical data that you've collected and unproven beliefs. And the third is that your policy, your decision-making becomes irrational and predatory practices ensue. In 1976, Richard Dawkins called these viral beliefs memes. And like genes, memes replicate, they mutate, or they grow extinct. And as complexity accelerates, super meme beliefs start to appear. I'm going to talk about just a few of these that now become an obstacle to your company's growing, an obstacle to progress, to being able to make decisions that are forward-looking. First is irrational opposition. When a company is overloaded with data and they have no means by which to separate unproven beliefs with proven data, good data from bad data, and turn that into something actionable, you start hearing the word no. Everything is no. Every department is no. We can't afford it. There's lots of ways people say no. We can't fund that. We need to study it. There's lots of ways we say no. But when you say no, it is the same as gridlock. That is the definition of gridlock. All you have to do is look at Washington, D.C. No taxes, no health care, no, and you hear no, 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 and we wonder why things are gridlock. Personalization of blame. We have a tendency to be blame-seeking missiles. We like to go after Hillary Clinton for the Benghazi problem. We want to go after GE because they don't pay any taxes. We like to look for blame. Inside your companies, you'll look for blame. Inside your departments, you'll look for blame. When you have systemic problems, it doesn't matter if you pull one individual out. You will still have the systemic problem. So you want to watch for that. Counterfeit correlation. When 2 or 3 events happen within the same time period, it does not mean one is causal. In complex, chaotic models, you cannot go to one thing and say that one thing caused this to happen. If we just take care of that, it's done. And nobody understands that better than IT professionals. These are not linear problems anymore, and your IT structures are no longer linear either. Silo thinking. Silos are basically territories. In bad economies, people dig in. They don't want to share data. They don't want to store it centrally. Everybody's afraid of a cloud. Can you get into my stuff? I mean, these are natural territorial boundaries that I think as IT professionals probably face every day. And extreme economics. Everything cannot be justified by the bottom line. I'd say data security is an example of that. Everything that you do that is good for your companies, that is good for society, cannot fit into an economic model. And I realize that we live in a time where everybody wants that ROI. You know, what's the return on investment going to be? But you're going to have to put in infrastructure that has no ROI. And particularly when it comes to data security and backup. This is one of my favorite quotes. It comes from Dr. Edward O. Wilson, the greatest naturalist in the world. We live in a time when we have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology, and this is a dangerous situation. But a cognitive threshold is not our only evolutionary obstacle. We're not born blank slates. We've inherited certain behaviors that get in the way inside of companies being able to make progress. Collaboration versus competing, aggression and violence, which is completely natural in nature. If I feel threatened, I go straight to my lizard brain, which makes me want to fight you or run. Attraction to high-calorie foods. I discovered not long ago I'm a very rational person. I'm also Italian. I guess I'm constantly having an argument with myself because of that. But one of the things I discovered was that if you have a table and you have some carrots and some celery and some good things for me to eat, and right next to it you have a glazed donut, my hand is going for the glazed donut. Now, I should never eat a glazed donut again the rest of my life. That's the truth of it. So I began wondering, why is this? And the why is because in times of food scarcity, those organisms that were better at identifying high calories, they survived. They survived. And that was in my body. I have inherited that. I am a very good high-calorie seeking organism. And I know there's some of you that are from my tribe that are in the audience today. But not only that, I'm very good at conserving my calories. I don't waste them. Right? Unless I have to go look for more food or fight. And apparently I'm not alone. So when I talk about the cautionary side of big data, when I talk about the things that inhibit progress in IT departments, I want you to understand that sometimes you're up against very primitive emotions. I had a fellow come up who was a CIO of a Fortune 500 company, and he said, I really loved your presentation. It was funny, and you really get to how humans behave inside of companies and why these kinds of decisions get made. He says, but I don't really believe that I really operate on that level. And I thought about it for a moment. I came up with a really good plan for him. I said, okay, maybe I'm wrong about you in particular. I said, do you ever go to the grocery store? And he said, yeah. And I said, well, here, I got a little experiment for you. I said, I'm going to save you a lot of time. Don't go up and down the aisles. Here's what I want you to do. The next time you go to a grocery store, I want you to go straight to the checkout stand where all the people are waiting with their carts, and I want you to shop out of their carts. They have all the stuff you want, bread, milk, it's all in their carts. He says, I'm not going to do that. And I said, why? They haven't paid for it. It doesn't belong to them. It belongs to the store. What do you think is going to happen? He said, well, the store manager will come over. I go, what is he going to do? They haven't paid for it. It's just in their basket. He says, well, a fight's going to... I said, why would you fight over something neither of you own? Right? And he said, I got your point. So now he's running around. I created a dangerous human being. He's running around the country doing all these animal experiments all the time, right? Inside his company and outside. Why is that? Because a territory represented the food and the water that you needed to survive. That's why, by the way, zone coverage in sports works so well. It's also the reason man-to-man coverage works so well. You see, in sports, they tapped into the biological predispositions we have because we are designed to defend our truth, those we care about, those we feel connected to. And by the way, if for some of you who wind up going into meetings and warning about things that are going to happen, because I know a lot of you do this. If you're in the technology field, you can see the problems coming, particularly in the area of data security. And you may go into a meeting and say, we got to get on top of this now, not later down the road after we have the problem. And you'll see that nobody's really getting that interested. Well, why aren't they interested? Well, I'll tell you why. What is going on with the lights? Somebody like that other slide. And I'm going to tell you why. Because we can put people in a room and measure their blood pressure and their pulse, and we can show them all the pictures of what's going to happen with climate change, and their heartbeat doesn't go up one an hour, not even 1 beat an hour, right? But if I throw a snake in the middle of the room, all of you are going to be falling over each other to get away from the snake. That's because biologically, your body is designed to flood with chemicals as soon as there's a near-term danger. And it is also the reason in many companies, and in particular in sports, we reward the hero who makes the 9th inning save. You never hear the coach or the CEO, you never hear the coach go into the back room with the team after they won and said, why was the 9th inning save necessary? Oh no, we put the hero on our shoulders and we march in and triumphant. And he gets the big picture in the newspaper. But as IT professionals, that's very inconvenient. Because once the danger is upon you, it's fundamentally too late. You needed to build that infrastructure way out in advance. So if there's a big gap, and that's the problem, how do we break the cycle? Well, this is Billy Bean, the former manager of the Oakland A's. How many people, I am going to ask you to raise your hand, saw the movie Powerball? Moneyball. One of my favorite movies on evolution, by the way. It was all about adapting to an environment. I'm trying, personally, to adapt to an environment where there's a Starbucks and a donut on every corner. Very inconvenient for me, right? In earlier times, I would have had to climb the top of a tree to get an apple, and the calories I would have consumed from that apple would have been less than me climbing the tree to get it. We had no orchards, no nothing. Calories are very scarce in nature. I'm now adapting to an environment where calories are everywhere. And all my genetic predispositions are saying, eat, starvation times are coming, right? In the same way that we have to adapt to a changing environment. Now, by the way, for those of you who don't know, we have broken down the human genome, and we only have a 5% difference in genetic material from a bonobo monkey. But in my view, as a sociobiologist, I will tell you we have leveraged the heck out of that. That 5% difference has allowed us to go into outer space, invent computers, big data, artificial intelligence, nanobots, robots are coming, quantum computing is coming, 3D printing is coming, all coming your way in a couple of years. And that is absolutely amazing, but part of that 5% is our ability to reason, to overcome the lower instruments of our thinking. The highest instruments of our genetic inheritance is to preview future consequences, and that is what this conference is about. In my view, you are wonderful at thought experiments. You're trying to get out ahead of your companies. You're trying to get out ahead of what the problem is. And that is why conferences like today's conference is so very important. There are two antidotes for growing complexity. I'm going to talk about behavioral adaptation and also physical adaptation. Mitigations are fine. You deal with stopgap measures every single day. Every time you get a phone call and something's down, you're implementing something that's a stopgap measure. But which mitigations are important? I'm going to say to you that when you're a bad picker, you can't pick the right solution. And so what happens is through trial and error, we have a tendency to run the clock out while overall conditions of the IT structure are beginning to deteriorate. I use the Gulf oil spill as a great example of that. When the Gulf oil spill first happened, we were watching every night these mushroom clouds of oil could come to the surface in the water. And the first thing we did was we went in with a concrete box and put it on top of the hole. Does everybody remember that? And we waited 30 days and we said, no, that's not going to work. So we began drilling to capture some of the oil beneath the surface and see if we could siphon it off. We waited 30 days, that didn't work. And finally, we came up with a solution of static kill. This is what happens when you try to fix a complex problem in a serial mode. But imagine if static kill had been solution number 82 or 149. We got lucky. We got lucky. So what kind of mitigations work? Well, it turns out we have models for high failure rate environments. Venture capital critical is a wonderful model. If you know any venture capitalists, they do pretty well with only a 10 or 15% success rate. They invest in 100 companies, they're only expecting 10 or 15 to make it. And yet the failures are not as significant as the wins. The rescue of the Chilean miners was done in this way. Again, mission critical situation, time sensitive. Had to get these guys out. Same as the Gulf oil spill. Same as many of the problems that you face in IT. What did they do? They said, we can't call it. They were smart enough to say, we're not going to call the right rescue plan. So they implemented 16 plans. And as they got further down the road, 16 turned to 15, 15 turned to 14. And even when they rescued every single miner successfully, they were still executing 3 plans at one time. Now people say to me, well, we can't fund 16 solutions at one time. Oh, yes, you can. The volume of investment is exactly the same. If you start out with many and get down to one, or whether you try to pick the right solution and take it all the way to completion and say, nope, that concrete box didn't work. Nope, the siphoning didn't work. Oh, static kill, that seems to have worked. You do it in a serial mode. If you make your decisions in a serial mode, I promise you, you will run the clock out. I just want to remind you also that as you're driving toward more efficient models, because I'm talking to you about an inefficient model that becomes efficient, right? I'm talking to you about lots of waste on the front end in order to perfect the ultimate solution. A reminder that in nature, any drive towards singularity makes you more vulnerable as a species. If you ever see an animal and it only eats one type of food, it's doomed. It's going to become extinct. As you drive toward efficiency, you frequently are driving towards singularity. I often hear people saying, well, we're going to put everything up on the cloud. And I go, well, that's really wonderful. I'm really happy. What happens when cloud access fails? You're completely down. We have a problem, in particular in IT, of not knowing the difference always between waste and redundancy. And a lot of necessary redundancy is getting cut in the name of waste. Oh, we don't use that. Oh, we don't need that. I would caution you to make a criteria within your company. Actually write down the criteria. What is waste and what is absolutely mission critical redundancy that we must not touch no matter how deep the budget cuts go. Because diversification in the long run is longevity. Backup systems are necessary, and frequently they're treated as waste. I want to talk to you for just a moment about how essential big data systems are. In my view, I describe big data systems as the marriage of business intelligence with artificial intelligence. Nobody calls big data artificial intelligence because we had the artificial intelligence winter, where we kept thinking it was coming, coming, coming. Those of you that are my age thought it was coming 25 years ago, and it kept dying and dying and dying until nobody wanted to fund it. So we came up with new words. And the problem with artificial intelligence was that it didn't marry with business intelligence. And now it does. And it is essential in reducing complexity. Why? Because when you have billions and billions of variables that have to be assessed in a split second, the human brain cannot do that. There are no spreadsheets you can come up with. There is no process you can come up with where you can take as much data as we've developed from the dawn of humankind to 2003. You can't search all that data and then put it together without analytics. Just impossible. So we're moving away. You are in this messy period. Let's just call it for what it is, where you're moving away from information production to analytics. And if you don't have a plan to move to analytics, and you're just generating more, it is a problem. And it's probably a problem for you right now. It's the largest growing area. These third platform areas are the largest growing. Big data spending is up 30% this year. It's going to be mainstream, because how else are we going to handle that data? You don't have analytics and algorithms on the back end. It isn't happening. It doesn't matter how much data you generate. And we haven't even talked about things like facial recognition software. Imagine cameras on someone's face, every employee's face, 24 hours of data. We're moving from big data to big data to ginormous data. We're going to need new words for it. And the largest big data impact is obviously going to be in those that are generating the most. I'm not going to talk about IBM's Watson program, which is the one that I happen to be most familiar with, because you're fortunate to have Gary Robinson from the Watson team here, who's going to talk about some amazing applications and case studies here. So, to succeed in a high failure rate environment, you need a diversity of solutions. Use the venture capital model. Anytime you hear anybody in any meeting telling you, this is the thing we ought to do, automatically, the hair ought to go up on the back of your neck and you ought to say, okay, we'll do that. What else can we be doing? What else can we be doing? Open the funnel. Make sure you're not going down that oil spill road. Expect failure. In a high failure rate environment, you're going to have more wrong decisions than right ones. It's okay. In the end, your investment will be no less. And there are ways for you to succeed. Leverage big data and mobile and interactive technologies, and crowdsource, internal and external. And above all, avoid belief-based policy. Call it for what it is. Don't be afraid to sit in a meeting and say, do we really know that? And by the way, I'm going to add one more thing in here, and that is that it's always nice to go back through something that's failed. I call that the postmortem. The patient's already died. Now we're going to go in, we're going to find out why the patient's died. But in many ways, they're already dead. It already happened. And if that's all you're doing, if all you're doing is postmortem analysis, then you're already behind. What about a pre-mortem? Think about the pre-mortem. The pre-mortem is, if the patient were to die, what would the patient die of? Infinitely more useful. And how many companies say, if this system were to fail, if this were to go wrong, if this were not to be backed up, what would happen? How often do you ask the pre-mortem question? So the permanent solution, of course, is physical adaptation. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because we're going to, in a way, and you're all IT professionals, so I'm going to mention one thing to you. Neuroscience is on its way to your desk. Now, you know all problems in the company are going to wind up on your desk. We know this, right? Nod your head up and down if you know they're all going to eventually find their way to your desk. Okay, the two biggest departments where everything lands on is human resources and the IT department, right? Because all problems find their way there. Right now, if you think about it, it's the first time in human history that we can put a skull cap on your head and we can administer in laboratories increasingly complex problems until you start failing. So we give you easy problems. We're watching how your brain is using the left side, the right side, going back, using both. And then we start overloading you with lots of data choices. And it's really interesting. It's interesting that you start noticing that you're going to fail. And your brain starts adapting to this. And it says, yes, I'm failing. Yes, I'm taxed. I can't really do this. But we've noticed that every now and again, a small part of your brain called the ASTG lights up like a Christmas tree, and you solve a problem that is way above your pay grade. And neuroscientists are beginning to call this insight. It's the spontaneous organization. And I know all of you have had this experience where maybe you're showering, you're walking, or you're sitting in a meeting, and it's a really complicated problem, and you say, oh, I know, we should do this. And everyone looks at you and says, well, how'd you come up with that? And you don't know. It's not traceable. That's one of the signs of insight. It's different from using the left side of your brain, which takes this many solutions and then keeps weeding them down till you get to one or two and then you pick. Or creative synthesis. Synthesis is where you're talking to me and you have a little bit of moisture on the top of your lip and I know you're lying to me. But what insight is like, it's just basically walking into a warehouse and the decision just drops out of nowhere. These are some of the symptoms. I'm going to skip over these. We can now actually predict when you're going to have an insight about 300 milliseconds before you're going to solve a problem that you've never solved before by connecting two pieces of data that you have in your head in a way you've never connected them before. It's spontaneous, it's fast, it's almost like a supersonic way of thinking. And we don't have our arms completely around it, but on the positive side, Obama has funded the Map the Human Brain project last year, and you know what mapping the human genome has done for us, and our understanding of diseases and how to prevent diseases. So this is coming, and it's coming to an IT department near you. If this happens, if we're able to do insight, and we can take people from all walks of life, all levels of education. Remember now I said you connect two pieces of data in a way you've never connected them before? Like you can't solve a physics problem if you've never taken a physics course. So the important thing about insight is content loading. And there's a quiet revolution taking place in neuroscience right now where neuroscientists, not games people, are developing video games because we've just discovered that your brain wants to be warmed up before you solve very, very complex problems. If you think about it, if you're going to run a marathon, you stretch, hydrate, you train to do that. Our brains are overtaxed right now. For having a 5% difference with a bonobo monkey, we're kind of at the limit. So without computer-assisted decision-making and without the help of neuroscience on how we can load content faster, we're in a bit of trouble. That's why I say we're in that messy transition right now. However, we have given brain fitness tools to students, 23,000 students, grammar school students, and we had them do nothing else other than play a video game that warmed up all the parts of their brain, their spatial recognition, their memory, so on and so forth. 15 minutes before the start of school, and they now have 2 times the academic achievement. No change in curriculum, no change in teachers, no change in anything. Simply warming the brain up. We've actually found that if you give this to seniors, they have fewer car accidents because you warm up their peripheral vision, and they usually have their car accidents 10 minutes, within the first 10 minutes they're driving because their brains haven't warmed up yet. I talked about this already, that we're now mapping the human brain. So neuroscience is a great ally. If you're having some trouble in your company of people loading content, learning things, being able to adapt fast enough to the technologies that you're giving them and you need them to use, you might try a little trick. Load up these neuroscientific games on their computers and say, I'd like you to play this game for me, just for fun, 10 minutes before our meeting. And tell me what you think of this game. I'd like you to come to the meeting and tell me what you thought of this game, and then introduce the difficult discussion that you need to have. Everyone in my staff, all the people that I know, use these games. If you're interested, you can go to Posit Science, P-O-S-I-T. It's they're very fun. They look like video games, but they aren't video games. We're tricking you into doing something fun that's actually very good for your brain. I wouldn't recommend the ones that are not developed by neuroscience, and I have no affiliation with this company. I wish I did, but I don't. In conclusion, a thriving organization, a thriving society, the left and right brain is solving linear problems. Knowledge and unproven beliefs coexist. Then we hit a cognitive threshold. Problems persist, they grow larger, they become more dangerous. Beliefs replace knowledge. Super memes, those 5 super memes I talked to you about appear. Then we collapse to simpler systems. Systems that our brain and our biology find friendly and familiar. And then we start the ascension again. The history of every organization, NATO, United Nations, of every company, Lehman Brothers, Goldman Sachs, and no matter who Enron, this is the history of the Romans, the Mayans. It's the same pattern. It's the same pattern. We now know the mechanics of failure. And we also know, for the first time in human history, what the early signs of collapse are. Not the cataclysmic event that shoves you over the cliff. That's too late. We want to know what happens earlier. We know that it's gridlock. We know that irrational beliefs overtake empirical knowledge. We know that public policy or corporate policy becomes irrational, i.e. the subprime mortgage fiasco. And then collapse occurs. There are plenty of opportunities to turn the wheel, to execute pre-mortems, to use high failure rate models for success. Plenty of opportunities to do that. And obviously, the brain itself is changing, and I can't talk very much more about that. The big discovery is that we cannot progress farther than evolution will allow, but we do have technologies and models to assist us through this transition. Fast adaptation means technology for better computer-assisted decision-making, which means driving toward artificial intelligence, strategic changing and adaptations, and physiological adaptations. And in conclusion, this is my next to Moneyball. This is another movie that I like to tell people to watch in terms of our evolution. And that is Lawrence of Arabia with Peter O'Toole. Also one of my favorite movies. And I will say that in the movie, there comes a point where Anthony Quinn is telling Peter O'Toole, it is written, it is written. We can look ahead and see the future, and we know what's coming our way. And there finally comes a very climactic point where Peter O'Toole turns around to Anthony Quinn and he says, nothing is written. The future is wide open. We are in a transitional point. Collecting more data, collecting more analysis will not help us. We are at a critical point where the evolutionary assets we have are running out. Now we must depend on analytics, algorithms, and computer technology to take us the rest of the way, along with neuroscience and using better models for high failure rate environments. And I think on that note, thank you. I've really enjoyed being here today with you. I don't think there's time for Q&A, but they have arranged for me to be at a table in the back to take any of your questions. I know that you'll have a lot of them, and I know they're on a very tight schedule here today. Before I sign off, I do just want to say one more thing. I'd like to thank Scott, Quade, and Amanda, and the corporate sponsors of today's event. Can we have a big round of applause for the people who are today? I'd also like to thank the attendees for being here today, because to me, the most important thing is that you're here, you're engaged, you're learning. And again, my job this morning is simply to give us a context for where we may stand in the whole scope of human evolution as well. Now, Scott says can I take one question?
Sure.
Okay, I can take one or two questions. Are there any brave souls in the room? No brave souls? Oh, come on now. Somebody's got a question. No? All right, you prefer all to give your questions one-on-one. Is that right? Nod your head up and down, yes? Okay, all right. Well,